Hello and welcome to the third part of the seventh recording in the Azure Demo Series. So in this particular recording, we'll continue from where we last stopped and we'll complete the rest of this particular lab by completing exercise 3, which will be talking about Azure Backup. So we'll be creating and configuring Azure Recovery Services Vault and then downloading the Azure Backup Agent or the Azure Recovery Services Agent as it's now called, and then configuring that on the machine to protect files and folders on that machine. So let's just get into that. So ensure that you're doing this particular, at least whenever we need to switch machines, I'll let you know. But when you're starting this particular exercise, ensure that you're doing that from within the lab machine, not from within the machine that was created when we ran the script. So within the lab machine itself, which is the MIACL1 or whatever name that you used for yours. So in this case, I'm already logged into my MIACL1 machine. If I go on the server manager, you can see that here. So let's get to that. Very first thing that we'll do in this particular exercise, task number 1, is we'll create a recovery services vault. So that's what we'll do. And we'll create it in a new resource group with that resource name. So this is the vault where the backups will be stored in Azure. And we have to specify a bunch of configuration parameters for it. So if I go ahead and click on create a resource, again, I'm following the manual that we have here. And I'm following the manual and the information that we have here. Okay, protect using Azure Backup. So if I click on that, and then if I click on the storage, and on the storage here, we have backup and site recovery OMS here. So if you go ahead and click on that, it's going to ask for a vault name. I'll go ahead and put in the name that we have from the lab, which is the vault name. It's going to say, do you want to create which subscription do you want? We only have one. If you have more than one, you can select whichever one you want. Do you want to use an existing or create a new resource group? I'll go ahead and create a new one here. And I'll put in this name there. So the location of the vault, where will I store where will this vault be? That's where your backup will be stored. So when you're considering this again, and this is not an architecture course, or that being separate videos like the deep dive series. So you have got to consider things like data governance for whatever region that you are in. Are you allowed to store your data outside whatever in the region that you're about to select? You have to consider all of that. You have to consider things like performance also. You probably want to have a look at some Azure network performance map and see what the performance is between the source region and the destination backup region. If the resources that you're trying to back up, if they are in Azure, that is. If they are on-prem, you want to have them as close to your on-prem resources as possible region-wise, because there's the limitation of the speed of light and all this stuff. So okay, I'll go ahead and just select West Europe, which is the same location that I've been using for my previous deployment, and I'll go ahead and click create. Very simple and straightforward. We have our Azure Recovery Services Vault that will now be created. So what I'll probably do, so the very next task, let's see what we're doing here, why that's created. So we're going to configure the vault for on-premises backup. So even though I'm doing this on an Azure VM, I'm going to select on premises. So this is just to simulate to you that you can indeed configure it and say, I want to back up resources on premises. It does not only work for backing up resources in Azure. You can use it for that, but you can also use it to back up resources on premises if you want to. So in this case, I'll configure the vault for on-premises backup, and then I'll install and configure the Azure Recovery Services Agent. That will make sense when we actually start doing that. Let's see if that's completed now. Yep, so that's completed now. So what I want to do is I can go ahead and click on the notification tab, and then I can click on go to resource. That will take me straight to the resource that I just deployed, which is the Recovery Services Vault here. And then under here, if I on the overview, I have the option here that says plus backup. If I go ahead and click plus backup, it's going to come up with this menu where I can do some configuration. So where is your workload running? Azure on premises. I'll select on premises for this particular one. That's what the lab says we should select. says, what do you want to back up? You can see here we can back up Hyper-V virtual machines, VMware virtual machines, SQL Server, SharePoint, Exchange, System State, bare metal recovery. So this is a really robust backup solution, if you ask me. Plus, it's cost effective also. Think about some of the old methods and options that we used to use in the past. We used to pay for compute to run backup and a bunch of other stuff. So in this case, where do you want to back up? I'll just go ahead, or what do you want to back up? Sorry, I'll go ahead and select just files and folders and leave that. Then it gives me the option here and says go ahead and prepare the infrastructure. So I'll go ahead and click on prepare infrastructure. And yeah, it takes us to this other, the second part of this wizard, which is install the Recovery Services Agent on the machine that has the files and folders that you want to back up. So what I can do is I can click on download the agent there, and it's going to download this agent that you can see here on the machine. So what I can do is after downloading the agent, I can just go ahead and click on that to begin the installation of this agent. So let's see the agent come up. So starting the setup, I'm going to leave the default location and default cache location and just go ahead and click next to that. I'm not using any proxy. I'm outbound for internet connection. I'll go ahead and click next to that. Do you want to use Microsoft Update? It's recommended. Use Microsoft Update when I check for updates recommended. I'll go ahead and select that and go next. It's telling you that I require .NET Framework 4.5 and Windows PowerShell to be installed on this machine. Then you're going to be running that. I'll go ahead and it's selected and says it's installed. By the way, if it's not installed, it's going to grab them and download them and install them. So I'll go ahead and just click on install. And the installation of the Azure Recovery Services Agent should begin. So it's doing a bunch of stuff in the back end. And then once that's finished, what we'll have to do is we'll need to configure this agent, because this agent needs to hook up with the recovery services vault that we've created, right? And to do that, we need to get some things called some vault credentials to be able to do that. You see what I mean once all this is, once it's completed the installation, you see what I mean by that. So yeah, it's completed successfully. It says you want to proceed to registration. I'll go ahead and says yes, proceed to registration. Then it's going to come up with this wizard and say, can you point me to the vault credentials? So that is where we move to step number 2 in the prepare infrastructure here. So in step number 2, what we need to do is says download vault credentials to register the server to the vault. Vault credentials that you download will expire after 2 days. So I'll go ahead and select the option to say I've already completed step number 1. Then it's going to give me the step to download the credentials to complete step number 2. If I click on download, it's going to do some processes and then it's going to download these vault credentials. So these vault credentials is what I have here. And what I'll do is let's go back to the Azure Recovery Services here. And then if I click on Browse, I'll go under my Downloads directory and select the Vault credentials. And then it's going to load that. You can see it automatically identified my subscription, the region where the Recovery Services Vault is, and the Recovery Services Vault name. So all those are included in the credentials, as well as the credentials to access that. So if I go ahead and click next to that, I need a passphrase that I'll use to encrypt and decrypt backups from your server to the other hand. I'll go ahead and click on the option to generate a passphrase. So it's going to generate a passphrase. If I want to enter something locally, I can enter one. But in this case, I'll just go ahead and click on, sorry, if I want to enter something, I can enter one manually if I wanted to. But in this case, just generate one. It's going to ask me and say, to save this passphrase. So this is very important here, because if you read the instructions below, it says if your passphrase is lost or forgotten, data cannot be recovered. So it is strongly recommended that you save your passphrase to an external location. In other words, you have to have a good backup and DR plan for this passphrase. You can't lose it. Otherwise, if you lose that, you may not be able to recover your files. So I'll go ahead and select a location to save this passphrase. I'll go ahead and save it on the E drive on the lab files. on the lab 06, which is where we are, on the starter, and I'll click on starter and I'll click OK. So save that in that location. So let's go to that location here. Lab files, lab 06, starter, and we'll see the passphrase saved there. If I click finish, it's going to register this particular server with Microsoft Azure Backup with the Recovery Services Vault, and then I can begin to configure the backup. So as part of that also, if I go under here, it's going to save the passphrase in this location here. So let's just give that a while to complete. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and pause the recording, and then once the registration is finished, I'll resume the recording, and then we can carry on with the remaining tasks. Hello and welcome back. So that did not take too long to complete, by the way. So that's completed relatively quickly. And you can see it says the passphrase was saved to that location. If I go to that location, I have my passphrase saved here. So that's important. So I'll go ahead and minimize that. I'll leave this option ticked to launch Microsoft Azure Recovery Services Agent and then click on close. So that will launch the agent after I close that. So here we go. And here's the Microsoft Azure Backup Agent that I've opened up on this machine. So, excuse me. Let's move on to the next task, which will be to create a backup schedule for the backup agent. So what we'll do is in this pane, there's this option here to schedule a backup. If I click on that option, I can schedule a backup, and it's going to give me the option here. So on the getting started page, I'll click next. It's going to give me the option and say specify which items do you want to back up. I'll go ahead and specify the files and folders that I want to back up. In this case, I want to back up the E directory on the lab files, on the lab 06, on the starter, I want to back up asset images and invoices directory. So you can select whichever directories or files and folders that you want to back up. In this case, I'll select these two for this lab and click OK to those. If I want to configure things like exclusion settings and exclude certain types of files in those directory, I can configure those from here, but we're not doing that in the lab. So click next to that. So it says schedule a backup the frequency of backup. Do you want backup to run every day? Maximum times allowed is 3 times a day. Do you want it to run every week? And then we can specify all those configuration. In this case, I'll leave that set today, and I'll set this to 4:30 a.m. in the morning to run the backup. And I'll go ahead and click next to that. So it's going to ask me to configure the retention policy. So here we can set how long is Azure going to retain the backup for. We can configure all of that. So weekly retention policy, monthly retention policy, and yearly retention policy. It's going to retain one of each. So I can select whichever one or configure my retention policy here. For now, the lab manual says to click next, so let's click next. So choose initial backup. So do you want to back up automatically over the network for the initial backup? Do you want to do an offline backup? In this case, if we have something that's too heavy or that's really large to go over the network, we can back it up privately and then send that off to Microsoft to import for us. But in this case, I'll select automatically over the network and click next. And on the confirmation page here, that's what we're going to be backing up. Location, we can view details and see what we've configured. And if I click finish, it's going to create the backup schedule for us. So once this is finished, we'll actually just go ahead and close that. And we'll actually just go ahead and click the option to just back up now. So we want to do our backup immediately now. So if I click the option to back up now, and this is task number 5, by the way. So that should come up. Yeah, there we go. So it comes up and says, what do you want to back up? The only backup that I've configured is for files and folders, which is the only option that I can select here. If I click next, it's going to tell me I'm going to back up the options that you've already configured earlier. I've not configured any network throttling or proxy server settings, so it's not going to use that. Those, if I want to change those, I can click on change properties and I'll be able to change them. In this case, I can just click on backup, and the backup will actually begin. So it's going to begin to transfer the folders and the contents of the folders that I selected to the Azure Recovery Services Vault. So for me to verify that is if I go to the Azure portal here, and I'm already done with this because this remaining step of the process is a manual. We schedule the backup. Once the backup is scheduled, we can use the backup jobs page to monitor, and then we can configure things like notifications, which is beyond this scope, but we'll talk about those in other videos. So if I go ahead and click close, and yeah, you can see backup items now. I have one already. If I click on that, backup items, and let's see, and I can see that the backup item, which is the um, location that I selected for my files and for my folders that I selected to backup. So I can see that it actually started the backup here, and then also you can see the agents um, data transfer completed and backed up. All data is in the cloud, verifying data integrity. So it's already finished the backup. It's just currently verifying the integrity of the data now. And again, I can verify that by going on the backup items. I should see my backup here. Okay, so let's move on to number 6. So what happens in the case of maybe we're decommissioning this particular server and then we want to delete the backups, we want to get rid of all the files there, and that's task number 6, which will be stopping the backup and deleting it from Azure. So this one is a few quirks that I want you to pay attention to when it comes to this one. So let me ensure that the backup is finished here. Job completed, close. So the way to do that is I do that from Azure itself. To stop a backup, I do that from Azure itself. And if you cannot find this, what you need to do is you need to go under All Services and look for Recovery Services Vault. And there you can select your vault. And then within here, you can select Backup Items 1. And then under here, I can select the Azure Backup Agent, which is what I'm using here. And then I can select my backup here. So here you can see that I have the computer name that I'm backing up from here, MIACL1. This is very important. This computer name is in here because if you want to be able to stop and delete the backup, which we do from within Azure portal, it's going to ask us to enter the name of the computer, and it's very important that we enter the name exactly the way it is here. So that's very important. So if I go ahead and click copy to copy that, and if I go ahead and click the computer name then, and then I can see the protected servers there. I want to delete these servers from being protected by Azure Backup, and then I click on delete. It's going to say type in the server name. If I type in MIACL1, it's going to say no, and you're going to go, but that's the name of the server. Okay, I type in MIACL1, it's going to say no. It's very important because there's a dot at the end. So if I go ahead and paste the name that I put in, you can see MIA.cl1 dot. It's very important that the same way the name appears here on the backup item is the same way you put the name here. Here you can configure whatever reason that you're removing the backup. It's optional, and just go ahead and click delete. So that is the way that we stop a protected machine in Azure, and then it goes deletion successful, and then so that's done, that's stopped, and that's deleted. So now we can go ahead and uninstall the agent from our machine, and it'll be good. So that will be the end of this particular lab, which is on Azure Storage. I'll go ahead and clear the environment now, so using the same script that we're used to. So bring up PowerShell, excuse me, and the command that we want to run to clear the environment is remove 20533D environment. And then if I run that, it's going to ask me to allow it. Click on that, type in my Azure credentials, So ensure that you clear the environment before moving on to the next lab. So the next thing that he's going to do is he's going to go through Azure subscription, and actually he's going to detect that we're actually doing lab number 7. He's going to use the name of the resource groups that we created earlier to the text and says, oh, listen, I can detect that you're doing lab number 6. That's what I'm going to remove. I'm going to remove all those resource groups. Do you want to proceed? So if I go ahead and type yes to that and press enter, it's going to begin to delete them. So what it's going to do is all the resource groups that we created in this lab, which are 3 of them, 0601, 0602, and 0603, it's going to clear all of those. So it's going to take roughly around 13-14 minutes to complete this. So just give it some time, ensure that the whole environment is cleared before you move on to the next lab in this series. But thanks very much for joining me this particular lab on Azure Storage and then covering Azure Backup and Recovery Services. And I'll see you in the very next recording. Bye for now.